Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming. My name is Bernard Fajardo, and I'm a bookseller here at Politics and Prose. On behalf of the owners and of the staff, I would like to welcome all of you to our bookstore for this evening's event. As you may already know, Politics and Prose have gone back to hosting in-person events, along with our virtual book events, partnered events, trips, and classes. Please check our website for a full list. I know one exciting event that I'm looking forward to next month is Sadie Smith is going to be at Sidwell for her new novel, The Fraud. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. For the Q&A, please remember to step up to the microphone by the pillar over there before asking your questions, so you can not only hear and enjoy the conversation, but to also ensure that it is going to be recorded. Please turn off or silence your cell phones so as not to be disrespectful to our host and or to our author and moderator. For those of you who want to buy copies of the book, they are being sold right out at the front by the cash registers, so please grab a few copies. We will be doing a signing after the Q&A, so if you'd like to get your book signed, please line up by, once again, the pillar over there. Yeah. And lastly, once the event is complete, we ask that you fold up your chairs, lean them against something sturdy to help us out a bit. Now on to the main event. I'm honored to introduce Britney Daniels to all of you. Britney is a Black queer travel nurse and social advocate who has worked in hospital emergency rooms all over the United States. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree in nursing with a concentration in nursing leadership. Britney is currently working on her doctorate of nursing practice degree. She lives in Chicago with her wife, Saria, and their two dogs, Batman and Momo. Tonight, she'll be talking about her new book, Journal of a Black Queer Nurse. This work of nonfiction came from a journal of her experiences working as a Black queer nurse with a working class background, filled with stories that runs the gauntlet from hilarious to heartbreaking to maddeningly enraging. Journal of a Black Queer Nurse is a document about our for-profit healthcare system that constantly dehumanizes patients, especially patients of color. Britney highlights the need for empathy and commitment in navigating our convoluted healthcare system, both for patients and for those on the front lines of care. Tonight, she will be in conversation with David Johns, who is the Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition. So everyone, let us all welcome Britney and David.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm so grateful. Before we get started with our conversation, which I'm incredibly excited for, I thought I would read a passage from the book for you. Is that okay? Good. Okay. So as you know or may know, my book is written in vignettes. And I did this for many reasons. One, I have a very short attention span. So when I read books, I stop frequently and give myself breaks. Hi. So I wanted to make sure that the book was digestible and that the stories were easy to read and that folks could take breaks whenever they wanted to. Also, I wanted there to be space for the individuality and the uniqueness of each of these stories. And so instead of cramming them all as one into a chapter, I wanted to split them up into vignettes. So here we are. So the vignette that I'm going to read to you is titled Get My Asthma Pump. Patients become frustrated, understandably, when they are moved from one area to another within the emergency department. It is common in some emergency departments for patients to be shuffled around to different rooms or, in worst case, the hallway. It is believed to help the flow of the department, but from my perspective, it causes frustration and confusion for patients who are already under a significant amount of stress. One day, an older Black man was moved from one room in the emergency department to another room. When I was introduced to the patient became upset. Why am I in this room now? I thought they were moving me to a real room. This don't make no sense. I agreed. The doctor stood there shaking her head, not saying anything, so I decided to speak. I understand how frustrating being moved around the emergency department can feel. I'm sorry that it happened, but I will take good care of you until we're moved upstairs. My words seemed to infuriate him even more, as they confirmed his suspicion that he was not going upstairs anytime soon. His breathing started to speed up and he began coughing. I've been coming here for decades, and I never had to sit this long and wait for a room. Go get my asthma pump out of my bag. I quickly grabbed his inhaler as the doctor from the corner in the corner of the room gave me permission to do so. I reached out to the man with the inhaler in hand, and he snatched it faster than I could realize what was happening. He forcefully removed the cap from the inhaler, wrapped his lips around the mouthpiece, pressed down to dispense the medication, and as he did this, he exhaled, forcing air into the inhaler. I couldn't believe my eyes. This guy was blowing into the inhaler. He wasn't getting a bit of medicine that could help open up his airways and give him some relief and maybe save his life. Apparently, no one had ever shown him how to properly use the device. I looked over at the physician. We exchanged a concerned look, but she didn't say a word and then departed from the room. I stood there attempting to process everything that had been happening, realizing that the reason this man was in the hospital is because his asthma had gotten worse. His asthma had gotten worse because every time he used his inhaler, he was blowing into it instead of breathing in the medication. I pulled up a chair. I sat with him for 20 minutes, educating him on the proper use of his inhaler. I had him demonstrate it back to me. He was shocked. He felt the difference. He tasted the medication. He could breathe. I don't understand. I thought I was doing it right all these years. Why didn't they tell me? I shook my head. I didn't know how to answer him. I didn't know how to explain to this man, a Vietnam veteran, that our medical system fails people every single day, deciding not to spend time educating them. I wanted to talk to the physician, but I felt so much anger towards her, towards this healthcare system, and even towards myself for being complicit in it, that I didn't even bother. For how many years had that man blown into his inhaler, failing to receive the medication that he badly needed in order to improve, to survive? How many other poorly educated patients have deteriorated due to improper or absent training? It didn't feel like I could pursue these questions in the context of one nursing shift. I just went to check on the rest of my patients, hoping that the burning in my chest would die down, pledging to turn the focus on what I could do to mobilize large-scale change in my community so that people aren't left to blow fruitlessly into their inhalers with no one there to help them, no one there to tell them that what they need to do is inhale.
How y'all doing? I don't know that I need this for the recording, right? Otherwise, okay, I was going to use my teacher voice. Appreciate y'all being here. I told Brittany, I'm glad that she did that. We had a discussion about how she wanted this to go. But for those of you who have not yet had the chance of receiving this gift, know that there are so many moments like that in the book. Tell me your name, young lady. You were sitting next to me in the front row.
Oh, Jenny.
Jenny. Jenny was audibly responding to the story in ways that I love. And like, there's this like, I can't believe that happened. Like, this can't be serious. Like, this can't be what's going on in our care system today. Like, that's a through line through the book. And so my hope is that you will take these vignettes with you, because after I read them for the first time, they've stuck with me. Personal point of privilege, as was shared, my name is David Johns. I'm a sociologist by training, earned my PhD from Columbia, where I did 3 tours of duty, and I now lead the National Black Justice Coalition. We're the nation's only civil rights organization, both intentionally and unapologetically focused on the fact that as long as there have been people, because everything originated in Africa, we've been beautifully and incredibly diverse. So I want to say publicly to my friend what I've said since they told me that this book was going to be published, including with this title, just thank you, right? Thank you for writing a book to share your experiences, for claiming your queerness, right? And Black people are queer in a white context. So queerness explicitly so that we can all get closer to freedom. Brittany and I met in Israel. We did a trip to Israel and Palestine this summer, last summer. Time is a blur. And had the opportunity to get to know each other in a very different context, and I think most Black queer people to get to experience each other. And I want to start there for those who have not had that opportunity. So in the book, page 14, in a section titled Waiting by the Phone, you write, in explaining your journey to the medical industrial complex, that the desire to care for people from all walks of life stemmed from my long understanding history of being different. So I'd love for you to help unpack that, bless you, that statement, what it meant for you, and how your beautifully diverse identities not only show up with you as you move through hospitals and visit patients and educate your colleagues, but also the process of birthing this book.
That's a wonderful question and wonderful insight. And I have always been different since I was very young. So imagine me, but like 4, right? So when I'm 4, I'm small. I got crazy hair, and I'm picking my own clothes. And that usually consisted of a Bulls hat, because I'm from Chicago, a Bulls jacket, and matching shoes. I never wanted Barbies for Christmas. I never wanted dolls. I wanted trucks. I wanted tool sets. And I have a twin sister. My twin sister, she was happy with the expectations that my family put on her as far as her femininity and how she should behave and how she should look. But I was not, right? And so I refused to align with that. And because of that, I was treated differently for the majority of my life, including to this day, to this minute. So it's important for me to take what I didn't have, the love, the acceptance, and the space to be who I am, right? It's important for me to take that into my career. And so when I care for people, I want them to know that no matter what you look like, no matter what you wear, no matter how you appear, I'm going to take the best care of you because that's what you deserve. And that's what I felt like I deserved when I was little, and I just wanted to play with my little NASCAR.
How about that? So I want to do this. I want to ask you if you'll read Fresh Out of White Nurses. And as Brittany gets prepared to do that, I want to invite you all to close your eyes and imagine going to a doctor's visit, one that is pleasant and enjoyable, maybe even fun. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? I invite you all to do that because I found myself reading the book and then listening to you talk about it since then, appreciating that I don't know that I've ever gone to the doctor and had anything that felt like that, right? And so much of what I feel like the book does is invite us to imagine possibilities that are not constrained by the things that usually show up in the medical industrial complex. So if you could read that, I have a follow-up question.
So Fresh Out of White Nurses is another vignette, and the one that seems to be the most identified by bookstores and magazines across the country. So it's one of my favorites. So one of my favorite aspects of working at this Southern California hospital was that the hospital was incredibly diverse. Out of the entire roster of nurses in that emergency department, only 3 were white. One day, I was training a new graduate nurse. She had a great bedside manner and was generally wonderful with patients. Together, we stepped into our new patient's room. I introduced myself, as I always do. Hello, my name is Brittany. I'll be your nurse in the emergency department today. Before I could introduce the trainee, the patient raised her hand as if she was in an elementary school classroom, signaling to her instructor that she had a question. I smiled and I said, "Do you have a question?" The patient replied, "Yes. Can I have a white nurse?" My brittle grin quickly turned sardonic. I could see the hairs on the student's arms standing up, her bronze face turning bright red as a look of panicked confusion spread across her face. I paused for a few seconds, wondering if I should allow this patient to sit in her own discomfort. But that's just the thing. She wasn't uncomfortable. She locked eyes with me with no visible emotion, patiently waiting my response. "Excuse me," I stammered. dragging out her words and condescendingly pronouncing each syllable as if she were speaking to an individual that was hard of hearing, she announced, Caucasian. I couldn't believe it. I stared at her for a few seconds and then just blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Sorry, ma'am, we're fresh out of white nurses. The patient crossed her arms and shrugged her shoulders. Well, then I guess I'm stuck with you. I guess you are. Part of me hoped that this patient was intoxicated, high, confused, something. Anything that could explain, make it make sense. Anything that could explain this offensive, ignorant, and hurtful behavior. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case. After a thorough workup, it turned out she simply had some issues with her asthma and needed a couple breathing treatments. No psychiatric issues, no drugs, no alcohol, just ignorance, white superiority, and blatant disrespect. The nurse that I was training, who was in fact the only white nurse working that day, could not get over what the patient had said. She asked me how I was able to keep my composure, how I wasn't livid. I told her, I'm not allowed to lose my composure. That as a black woman, losing my composure would cost me my job. And most importantly, I kept it together because I was too focused on ending that moronic conversation so I could get back to doing my job. The nuances of the situation still rattle me to this day. I was responsible for protecting a patient who did not want my care because of my skin color, while at the same time trying to set an example for a nurse whose skin was in fact white. I feel like that day granted me a clearer perspective on discrimination and bigotry. That was the day I decided I would not allow the judgment of others to alter my passion, my determination, or my dignity. It was something like exposure therapy. The more I experienced discrimination, the more I was determined to fight against it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So one, I want to be clear that this is one of the moments where I put this book down and I was like, what the? And not only are there similar moments like this where there are moments of pain punctuated by experiences with patients, there are similarly painful experiences with your colleagues, right? Doctors, other nurses, and the like. So I found myself wanting to ask you while I was reading how you found joy and continue to prioritize caring for people in spite of the pain that they caused you while you were simply trying to do your job.
You know, one of the things that, you know, when you go on a job interview and they ask you, what would your colleagues say about you, right? My colleagues would say, if you're looking for Britney, she's in a patient's room, period, full stop. I'm not at the nurse's station. Why? Because I can't stand the nurse's station. I would rather sit and play bingo, Wordle, anything with a patient than be at the nurse's station. So, with that being said, I refuse to allow the ignorance, the lack of empathy, the selfishness of the people that I work with to deter my passion, which is caring for others, despite their beliefs, despite what they think of me. My job is to provide the best possible care so that you can have the best possible outcome. And just like my patient who wanted a white nurse and didn't get one, she left better than she came, right? And so maybe, just maybe, she'll go home that night thinking, maybe black folks ain't so bad. Maybe black nurses ain't so bad, right? One person at a time. I know I can't change the world, but I do know that with persistence, right? We wouldn't be in this position today if it weren't for our ancestors and their persistence, right? Their refusal to give up. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
I appreciate you for doing that and celebrate that not everybody is like you in that space. So given that you are the expert and you wrote this book to help share lessons that we should all benefit from, how do we, those of us in this space and who will consume this at some point, access the best quality care given all that's wrong with the medical industrial complex in our country today? There
is so much work to be done. And I can't do it all. Y'all can't do it all, right? There's not one doctor, not one advocate that can fix it. It's going to take all of us. And so when people ask me, what can I do to make sure that I have a good experience at the hospital, I usually tell them not to go to the hospital alone. Having a second person with you introduces a level of accountability that doesn't exist when you're by yourself. And I've seen and heard interactions where people, medical professionals, are nervous, for lack of a better word, because there's other people in the room. They loved it. They loved it during COVID when nobody could be in the room. They loved it because they could do what they want, act how they want, and there's nobody that could stop them. That's the backstage version of what's going on. It's not about, I mean, it is important for us to protect ourselves from illnesses, right? But at the same time, doctors and nurses loved not having to deal with family members because family members hold them accountable. Family members ask questions. Worse than that, they ask clarifying questions. That's crazy, right? So if you have to go to the doctor, if you have to go to the hospital, don't go by yourself. Second set of eyes, second set of ears is really important. It's really important also to ask questions, right? When we're in a situation where the person that is providing a service to us, and this is a service, medicine, and they know more than us. It's just like when you go to the car dealership, right? And there's that whole stereotype about car salesmen, right? And how they're trying to play you. Doctors are doing the same thing. They make money off the tests that they run, right? They make money off the medications that they prescribe, right? They don't get paid by the patient. They get paid by the shift. So they're trying to get you out of there, okay? They need to bill. They need to bill and they need to bill so that they can make their money. And if they don't feel like they're going to make money, depending on the situation, they're going to deny you care, right? And that's why we see folks getting turned away from hospitals, turned away from clinics. And we're talking about life-saving treatments that people are being turned away from. So if you go to the hospital, take someone with you. When you go to the hospital, ask questions. Don't accept any first opinion. Always get a second opinion. It's really important that physicians and medical providers know that you are advocating for your own care. And when they know that, they approach you differently. They explain things differently. And that's going to change your outcome incredibly.
What's I appreciate that. Y'all should thank her for that. What's the one question that you wished every patient asked? Knowing and understanding that care is individualized and it usually has to do with why you're presenting. But we just think about, most of us at least go for an annual physical. I wish more of us did that for our mental health as well as our physical health. But what's the one question or types of questions you wish more of us were armed with and or equipped to ask?
The one question that I wish people asked more is this our only option? I took care of a little girl who kept passing out. Her mom's like, I don't know what's going on. Mom brings her in. She's anxious, right? Because her daughter keeps passing out. The doctors come in. They immediately recognize the mom's anxiety, and they're paying more attention to the mom's anxiety than they are the patient. And so I'm watching this whole thing take place. I'm a fly on the wall. Listen, I'm assessing all parts of the situation at all times, right? And so the doctor leaves the room. They go to, basically they have to staff or give a report to the attending doctor and kind of decide what the plan of care is going to be. And so I'm listening to the conversation. The conversation goes like this. That mom is so anxious. Ain't nothing wrong with that little girl. And so I said, hey, over here. I was in the room. They said that they're literally documenting the dates and times that she's passing out. Her anxiety has absolutely nothing to do with the problem that the patient is having, right? So they try to discharge the patient. They say follow up with a cardiologist in a week or two, right? Send her home to pass out some more. So I'm sitting down having a conversation with the mom, and she's desperate, right? She's desperate for an answer. She's desperate for a solution, right? She wants to send her daughter to school. She doesn't want her to fall behind. So I said, let me just go talk to them. Let me go talk to them. And I'm a travel nurse, right? So when I'm at a hospital, I'm only there for 3 months, sometimes longer. But I'm not a nurse that's been there 10 years, and so that changes the way the doctors interact with me. But I went to the doctor and I said, "Hey, I know that y'all think that mom is just tripping, but riddle me this: if your kid was at school, passing out, hitting their head on the floor, would you want something to be done about it?" He threw his hands up. "Okay, what do you want me to do?" I said, "Maybe here's my clinical opinion. If this little girl is passing out and you think it's not neurological, you think it's cardiac, fine. Let's put a patch on her. There's a patch called a Zio patch, and it monitors all electrical activity in the heart for as long as it's on, right?" This mother, 2 weeks after this visit, found me on Instagram to tell me that they found a diagnosis because of the patch. It doesn't. Thank you.
Yes, yes. See, yes, it would be a black woman too. See, yes.
It's really important to say, is this our only option? Is this our only option to go home and see someone in 2 weeks? Is that it? That's the best you can do? Because usually the answer is no.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I consume a lot of media, some might say ratchet TV. And there's a show I watch about black women in the South. And one of them has been having challenges and complications, and her doctor immediately wanted to give her medicine, and her first thing was to say, "I'm gonna try everything before I do that." Right? Like that there has to be something else, homeopathic, natural, let's go to Eastern types of medicine before I do the thing that you're most inclined to tell me to do in this context. So I appreciate you coloring that canvas. In the book, you talk a lot about, for me, how the ways that we are wired to make assumptions about each other affect the experiences that we have in medical spaces. And in particular, you talk about, while naming medical apartheid and Harriet Washington, who wrote that book, two things, which is Hispanic panic and African-American drama. You touched on this a little bit in the last story you shared. So I'd like for you to unpack how stereotypes impact or prevent care, and what you hope the book would do to disrupt that and maybe shift the system.
Definitely. So the first time I heard Hispanic panic and Afro-American drama, I was working at a hospital in Southern California, and I was not surprised, but disgusted at the same time. The doctor completely disregarded both patients while using those two stereotypes as a resource. Like, it was almost like he cited his source. like I don't have to do anything because Hispanic panic at all. It just didn't. I was so confused. And it really does change the way that folks are cared for. And there's a vignette in the book that talks about the woman who couldn't find her dogs, and they thought she was batshit. They were like, "There's no dogs, Brittany. You need to, you care. I get it. You care so much. That's cute. But there are no dogs." Guess what?
There were dogs.
Thank you. There were dogs, right? And so these stereotypes truly, they cause this huge brick wall to just drop right between you and the physician, and all the care and all of the treatments and resources that someone needs. They can't be passed through that wall because of those stereotypes. And I feel like the book really makes people reckon with those stereotypes, because when I heard them the first time, it just rolled off the tongue so easily for him that I don't even think he realized how messed up it was that he was saying it. And so I think that for nurses across this globe, it's important to take your finger and point out those stereotypes and identify them. And then once we pull that veil back and refuse to ignore them, we can start addressing them.
I also appreciate you underscoring the vital role that nurses play, which is often overshadowed by the space that doctors occupy. So just want to say thank you and shout out to all of the nurses. I don't know if anybody is in the, here we go, see? Just say thank you for occupying that space and for often doing a whole lot of work that you don't get credit for. or compensated for. So thank you for that. I have two more questions. I know. Two more questions, one personal, one about process, and then want to invite you all to join us and engage directly in this discussion with us as well. So one is about the process, right? So the book is titled A Journal of a Black Queer Nurse. I know some people probably are like, oh, you set out to write a book when you started in the profession. I know that that's not quite the case, but can you talk us through the process of birthing this book and what it entailed?
Definitely. So when I initially started journaling, it was only, and I mean only, to remember passwords, because you log into the computer with one password, then you log into the charting system with another password, but then you got to check your hours with another password. And so initially that's all I used my little journals for, was so that I wouldn't get locked out while I was trying to take care of folks. And then I start this, bouncing around at different hospitals, and instead of using my little badge to open doors, they're like, oh no, we have a number code. And I'm like, so then I used my little journal to record these codes so that I wouldn't get locked out of the break room when I had to pee. And then the doctor at the first hospital I worked at got really, really upset that a woman had a wife. And that was a day that I was like, and I started journaling. That was when it all changed. That was when that transition happened. And it really allowed
Wait, no, not Anne. You about to gloss over. I was like, don't do that, Linda. Let's rewind. Tell us, so set the scene. It was Sicily, 1942. So we're in this hospital with this doctor. How does this become an issue?
So this becomes an issue because we're at a Catholic hospital.
Okay.
And we have a middle-aged white man who has his degree in medicine, but has an understudy in religion, some sort of, I don't know. He fancies himself like a religious connoisseur. And so he thinks that he knows all, and that anything that is, as my wife would say, haram or bad or sinful shouldn't exist, right? And so because it shouldn't exist, he shouldn't have to take care of people who engage in sinful behavior. Right.
This from a person that willingly took a Hippocratic oath. Okay, keep going. Just tracking.
So that I did say something, and it wasn't received, but I said something. And so these journals they're small, right? And they probably have like 100 pages each. And I was just flying through them because I would journal after each shift, or I would journal after a really impactful event. So I found myself feeling like maybe I should do something with these stories, right? I started helping train and teach undergrad nursing students while I was getting my master's degree. And in doing that, I would use the context of my experience to help tie together these concepts that they were learning about, right? So we're talking about folks with hypertension. I would tell them a story, and it would make it stick for them. And so I found that since it helped them, that maybe I should use it to help others. And I decided that I wanted to tell the stories. I didn't know how that would look, but
here we are. It looks wonderful. So this was published in May. Congratulations. First book. Give Brittany a round of applause. And the book will soon be available on audiobook as well. And we know people learn and process in different ways. So there also are a number of podcasts that Brittany's been featured on talking about the book as well that you should all avail yourselves of. So here's my last question. I want to go back to the beginning. This is around waiting by the phone, where I quoted the initial quote about being different. So later in that paragraph, you also write, I remembered the joy of pouring my heart into the care I provided to patients back when I was a tech in the ED, and I badly desired to recover that feeling. Being able to console people in their scariest moments, advocate for those unable to advocate for themselves, make sick people smile, or better yet, laugh, brought me unimaginable joy. So what I know that other people might not know is that this hasn't been all rainbows and glitter. Declaring one's identity, one's queer, Black identity publicly often invites animus and vitriol and white supremacist, xenophobic, fascist. And so I want to name that your safety has been threatened publicly. that you've experienced additional forms of trauma that those that you process through in birthing this book. And so the question is, what is giving you joy now? Acknowledging that it's difficult enough to be Black, let alone Black and queer, let alone write about it, and then try and do work to liberate other people. What is giving you joy? What buoys you in spite of the continued attacks that come your way?
That's a wonderful question. Every once in a while, I will have a message in my inbox, that be Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. Someone telling me how powerful the book has been for them. You know how bad homophobia is in the Black community. It's not something that's widely accepted. I don't know if it's something that you all are aware of, but homophobia is a real issue in the Black community, especially in Chicago where I live. Even though we have places that are, Chicago is extremely segregated, and not just in a classist or economic standpoint. Chicago is also very segregated as far as anyone who is a sexual minority or gender minority. So when people reach out to me and tell me that the fact that I shared my story and told my story gave them the courage to be who they are, or to continue to be who they are, or to continue to do what they do, being who they are, has really touched me. Outside of that, the people that are around me uplift me every single day. They inspire me every single day, and I'm really grateful for it, and I wouldn't change a thing. I would do it all over again.
We're grateful for you. I want to invite you all to join us at the mic if you have a comment or a question. And as people make their way there, two things: personal point of privilege. One, a term that might be new for folks that usually comes up in this space. People tend to say coming out, right? Like there's this singular moment where you do this thing and then life shifts. For some of us, that's not ever how it happens. So a term we use at NBJC is inviting in, right? And it acknowledges that each of us have something that society tells us we should feel shame around or stigma around. But if we all do a better job of increasing compassion and competence, maybe we can have more conversations like this. So I'm thankful for you inviting us into so many parts of your life. The second thing is underscoring the points that Britney made about intra-communal work amongst Black people. I just want to underscore the point that every community is dealing with homophobia. Just last night at the Republican presidential debate, there was a clear delineation around where ideologically people stand, and so many people on that stage are like there are only two genders. In spite of the fact that scientifically and otherwise that has never been the case, we just don't want to acknowledge it. So we have so much more work to do, especially just this legislative cycle alone. There have been more than 600 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced across every state in this country, with the exception of one. The vast majority of those targeting trans folks, trans children, some of them going so far as to criminalize folks who provide life-saving and life-affirming care. So my hope is that all of us, regardless of the communities that we've been born into or birthed into or welcomed into, do some of this work to disrupt these binaries and boxes that were never meant to contain us. Please, your question or comment.
I'd like to run by you several COVID scenarios and get your reactions. And the first one is at Sanara Hospital in Norfolk, Virginia, Dr. Paul Merrick had 7 patients that he wanted to give ivermectin to, and he wasn't allowed to do that, and they all died. And he lost his privileges at the hospital, and he lost his license. So have you ever seen anything like that?
Unfortunately, I have. I've seen, I don't know if you've heard recently, but there was a case at Yale where there was a nurse who was stealing an opioid pain medication called fentanyl. And this medication was supposed to be used to decrease the amount of pain that people were going through when undergoing an egg retrieval. The patients were receiving saline, essentially water, instead of fentanyl because of this nurse stealing this medication. Her license was revoked. She was terminated, and she was charged. But she didn't really express an amount of remorse or regret exactly during the trial. So it's really disappointing and disheartening. But yes, there's a lot of cases that happen every single day where folks are harmed in healthcare, and it's honestly really nice to hear that this person had their license revoked and that they were fired. But a lot of times that's not the case.
Well, in this case, the patients, all 7 patients died because they followed the hospital's protocol, and they were not allowed ivermectin, which might have been life-saving, because a lot of studies show that patients get better very quick, and often they're on ventilators and they walk right out of the hospital the next day. So it's a little different situation than the one that you just mentioned.
What's the lesson for us in all of this, right? I found myself wondering, how do we find out about this? So in this case, people died. In this case, people experienced a significant amount of pain, but like, how do we learn about these things if they're not tried cases? But also, like, what's the lesson? What can we do as a result of this, or now having this knowledge?
So, for me, I think that it's important for folks to understand that our legislative processes and our policies have a lot to do with the way that these people are punished, I guess, in a way, right? And so when we talk about medical providers stealing opioids, right? Usually, depending on the rank of this person and the type of license that they have, they're recommended to have rehabilitation as opposed to having their license revoked, right? And so it's really important to understand the state that you live in, the county that you live in, what the policies are, and if you don't see anything that looks like it's effective or would be effective, then it's important to write to your lawmakers.
One related question, and then you might have another one, which is, I know in the case of the abuse of power with regard to policing, there are often community review boards. Is there something similar with regard to the medical industrial complex?
There are, and it honestly depends on where you live. So in the state of Illinois, we have the Illinois Department of Public Health, which is really big as far as advocacy work and policy. I think that the issue is that when we talk about who holds folks accountable, it makes me think of the 1993 lead study that was actually approved by multiple IRBs, which is the review board who approves research. And so black folks, marginalized folks in low-income communities were exposed to lead, and the landlords of these apartments, they agreed to not fix the lead problem so that the researchers could figure out what happens when folks are exposed to lead for a long time. And this led to children being affected psychologically, right, physically, and the people who were supposed to protect them, the IRB, were the ones who approved the study. So it's hard. It's really difficult with medicine.
What do you think of the situation where nurses were asked to administer resveratrol when it was prescribed, which was deadly, and also the ventilators, which were 90 or 80% lethal, according to Trump, and also to write up DNR orders when the family wasn't allowed to come and or even the patient wasn't allowed to know.
I'm gonna be real honest with you. I don't know anything about any of that.
And I'm like, you just reminded me, he should be in jail right now.
And then,
We're going to stop
then
that
the
whole
final
other conversation.
The final question that I have, so you're a visiting nurse, meaning
Traveling
nurse, meaning that you can on short notice go to various places where you're needed, which I guess was very helpful during the pandemic. But also, I don't know whether you got the mandated shots that nurses were asked to get. But
I did.
But there were some who didn't, and I guess if they were traveling nurses, they had it easy because they were able to then go to other places that were giving them bonuses to unvaccinated nurses to come to their understaffed areas?
There were not any bonuses given to unvaccinated nurses. There were bonuses given to nurses in general, and some hospitals had different guidelines as far as what they required nurses to get.
Can you say more as you come to the microphone about the distinction between traveling nurses and non-traveling nurses, just for the benefit of the group?
Certainly. So a traveling nurse is generally hired by a nursing agency. This agency is responsible for tracking the hospitals in various states and seeing who needs the most help. Then they write up a contract between the hospital and the agency. I'm just the person that's being sent out. So I don't work as an independent contractor. I work for my agency. My agency is in contract with the hospital. As far as staff nurses are able to be part of a union. A travel nurse can work at a union hospital, but they cannot be a part of the union or protected by the union. They don't get benefits from the hospital. They get benefits from their agency if they have benefits. And staff nurses get benefits through their hospital. There's benefits to both. For me, it was always about flexibility and being able to travel the world because I didn't get to do that as a kid. I've been travel nursing since way before the pandemic. I've been travel nursing since travel nursing wasn't cool.
Well, I guess, that tested good. I guess that tees up my question really nicely. Hi, also, thank you for coming to DC and sharing your book with us. General question for you and your experience, and you might talk about this in your book. I guess I'll find out. What has been your experience? You've been travel nursing for a while now. In your time travel nursing, I'm assuming that is over a broad swatch of the United States and potentially outside of. I'm seeing you nod, so I'm taking that as a yes. What's been your experience with, just gender affirming care generally, and also reproductive care for, people across the spectrum?
That's a good question. And funny story, I actually almost got terminated from my first nursing job because I've worked for Planned Parenthood of Illinois since 2012. And folks who go to the hospital for reproductive, concerns, usually if they're at a teaching hospital, it's not, religious affiliated, they're fine. But if they go to a religious hospital, they're usually shooed away or, they're offered treatment plans that don't align with what they're looking for. And I almost got fired because I was like, oh, girl, I work for Planned Parenthood. Do you want me to give you the number of the, and I gave her the personal number for someone over there, and she got an appointment, and some way, somehow, right, this got back to the administrators, and they had a whole ethics meeting about me, and I just felt so important. So I say all that to say, I'm gonna make sure you get your care, okay? I say all that to say that the gender affirming care, I work in the emergency department, and so there's not a lot that happens as far as gender affirming care in the emergency department, except for treating folks, right? We don't administer hormones or anything like that. But when we treat folks who are trans or non-binary, it's been made really accessible for healthcare providers as far as our charting systems. We can put we can list the gender that they ask us to list. We can list the pronouns. We can list the name that they ask us to list. But it all has to be done by a human, right? And so if a human doesn't listen to the patient or doesn't care about the patient's needs, they'll document whatever they want. And then that stays with that patient's chart throughout. And it's really difficult to have that stuff changed after it's put in the first time. And there's lots of people and lots of departments involved with doing that. So it can be I've seen it be really damaging for patients when the wrong gender is put in. And it's really frustrating. And that happens very frequently in the emergency department. Also, patients are misgendered in the emergency department very often. And I don't know what I can do outside of literally putting a poster on the door to keep people from misgendering patients, right? And this has caused a lot of conflict between me and other healthcare providers, especially doctors. One of the stories that I didn't put in the book was a story about caring for a trans youth. And That's why I didn't put it in the book. And it's really important to know that in caring for this trans youth, I watched them be misgendered over and over and over again. And so I took it upon myself, even as a travel nurse who had only been there for a month, I called a meeting. I called a whole huddle. I was like, everybody over here right now, called a whole huddle to address what was happening. And this included security guard, everybody, right? Because what we're not going to do is this, okay? So if you can't, and I said, if you can't get it right, don't take care of them. Don't go anywhere near them. Okay, you can't be a part of their care. As far as reproductive health, again, it's tough. It's tough. I've one of the patients that I first received a letter from was someone who had been seeking an abortion for quite some time and been denied an abortion from their care provider, and they were trying to use insurance, and it was a whole mess. And this was obviously before Roe was overturned. And the patient ended up miscarrying and came into the hospital, miscarried at 20-some-odd weeks. And it was traumatizing for her. And people just were not answering her questions. She kept asking. I feel like I can still hear her voice in my head. She just kept saying, "Is the baby dead? Is the baby dead? Is the baby dead?" And nobody would answer her. Everyone's just typing on the computers and grabbing stuff. And I looked at her and I was like, and that's why she wrote me the letter, because she said that nobody would answer the one question that she had after trying to receive the care that she had been needing for so long.
Wow, I wish I could say thank you to, but that's pretty awful. I've got a follow-up question here that you half answered with your anecdote about the trans youth that you worked with, but the two questions I had as follow-up, I guess I'll start with the second one. If you had any stories that you left out of the book that were more political in nature, or that you felt less comfortable, or your publisher felt less comfortable sharing, was the main question I had for you. So maybe we'll go with that one.
Yes. My publisher is actually amazing, and they didn't ask me to redact anything, but there were, I would say out of all of my journals, the book probably only contains about 30% of the stories that are actually in the journals. And yes, some were political reasons, some were just trauma, and I don't do trauma porn. Some of them, a lot of them were involving children. And so, and some of them were just too specific to be altered to make them, fictionalized. So,
got you. All right, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Related to that, are we as patients entitled to ask to see our charts?
Yes, okay. You are absolutely entitled to ask to see your charts. Yes, that's a very good question.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
Oh, I can ask for a copy to take it home.
The whole thing. Yep.
Even better. Okay, please.
We have time for more questions after me, but I'm asking a couple questions on behalf of my sister who's currently in nursing school. One would be, when you're teaching, what's the one piece of advice that you want your students to take away with you? And then the second question is, she's already getting the text being like, hey, look at this scab on my leg. What's wrong with it? Like, how do you handle those?
Okay, you're not going to like my answer to the second one. Let me answer the first one first. Okay, so the first one. Okay. I am the one who responds. Like, I'm the one who's like, no, send me a video, not a picture. I'm like, send me a video on 4K. Yeah. No, FaceTime is too grainy. I need a 4K video. Zoom in, zoom out. Yes, that's me. I know that it's annoying to some people, and for some people it's a nuisance, but I love that stuff. I love it when people reach out to me. And even just the other day, someone said, hey, is it normal that I'm here with my grandma in the ER, and she's here for stroke-like symptoms, and we've been here an hour, and they haven't done a CT scan. I was like, call me right now. Put the nurse on the phone. Like, that's me. I love those phone calls. I love those text messages. So, but if she's not, as a new nurse, right? As a new nurse, I get it.
She does, but she's so nervous. She's like, I'm
Sure.
only a year into my program. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I've always been a big believer of is, if you don't know, right, refer them somewhere. Like, hey, I don't really know, but you know who does? Your local ER, right? Or maybe, make telehealth appointment or something like that if if you think it's serious, or just like I have no idea. It's okay to say that, and that's one thing that I guess the nurses have a thing where they have to know they feel like they have to know the answer. Fuck that. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know. Otherwise, someone's gonna get hurt or they might die. And the first question, the advice that I give every student is to listen. Listen. I took care of a woman who was acting funny, and I'm like, why is she acting funny? And my gut was telling me something was wrong with her. And when we finally got her out of the room and away from her partner, she was like, he beats me every single day. He's why I'm here. And, you know what I mean? And just like listen to your people, listen to your patients, pay attention to their body language. Not everyone's being beat by their partner, I know, but there's always just something to hear, and there's always more than the surface.
We still have time maybe for one more question. I also would love if you want to just tell us who you are, what you do. We can say thank you for your work as well. If there's an intervention you also want to offer. Yes. And then before we wrap, I want you to tell people why you have this shirt on and who Breonna Taylor is to us.
Hello, my name is Jasmine. I am a labor and delivery nurse, currently a student to become a nurse.
You bring babies
midwife,
into the world.
Let's
go. Wow. ED hates us. They don't like pregnant people. They want to get them off the unit as fast as possible. But I entered this work, so I took a long route to becoming a nurse. I started with my associate's degree, then I got my bachelor's, now I'm pursuing my master's, because I knew I wanted to be a midwife, and I knew I haven't read your book yet, but I looked through the chapter that he mentioned about wanting to help as many people as possible, and it's hard as I'm so close to becoming a provider where there's so many appetizing jobs, right? Where you're oh, I can sleep and be a part of the world and go to brunch, right? Because I'm also a night shift nurse. I've been a night shift nurse my whole life.
Yes.
But it's also about being able to help as many people as possible and going where the people actually need you, right? Home births are beautiful and amazing, and it's where we should be allowing birth to happen, but it's not where the majority of birth happens. So you got to go to the hospital in the hood where people really need you, right?
Exactly.
So so that's it's not hard. It's just, it just is what it is.
Right.
But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for writing your book. Like I said, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I only just learned about this event this week. I just finished finals, so
congrats on that. Everybody give a round of applause.
Congratulations.
But, I'm very, very excited to read it. I'll be reading it on vacation next week.
Where are we going?
Miami.
Yes.
Yes to Miami, no to the state of Florida, being led by the failed history teacher.
Exactly that.
Miami's separate, though. It's not it's Miami-Dade County. It's not Miami, Florida.
Exactly. But I just wanted to echo, I absolutely agree when the question was asked, what advice would you give people? I said, is this necessary? But are there alternatives? I think as along the same lines. Yes, and I think that's so important. And also bringing somebody, because there is strength in numbers, and it sucks that you feel like you need to have an advocate, but you do, because the hospital is a business and you are just a customer, but you don't understand how valuable your patronship is to the hospital and to the medical industrial complex. And I always tell people, bring somebody, ask as many questions, and let them know that you are forced to be reckoned with, and that know your power. You know your power, even if you don't understand medical lease. I understand that my medical dollars are paying your bills,
exactly.
Right? And don't allow them to just shoo you away, make you feel less than. It's hard to believe, but I always try to tell people you are in control. Our job as healthcare professionals is to give you the information that you need to make the best decision for yourself, your health, your family, all of that. But yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you for your work, and thank you to each of you for the gift of your time, attention, especially the staff who made this space available and all of this operable. If you could do two things as we land this plane. One is share with folks who might not know who Breonna Taylor is, why you decided to wear that shirt. And then this has come up throughout the course of this conversation, and a part of me is loath to do this because we're wrapping up. But if you could help break down the business of the medical industrial complex, right right? Because I think a lot of us just think like it exists, and when we don't feel well, that's where we're supposed to go. But it is a business. So is there an antidote that you can share to help us unpack that while we further read the book and look forward to part 2?
All right, so number one, Breonna Taylor. The reason why, so when I graduated with my master's, I decorated my graduation cap for the first time, and I wrote Breonna Taylor on it. And the reason why I wrote Breonna Taylor's name on it is because Breonna Taylor wanted to be a nurse. She didn't get the chance to do that because she was murdered. She was murdered in her sleep in 2020 when a no-knock warrant was executed and police started shooting into their home and her partner's home through walls and through windows and through doors. Breonna Taylor died that night. Her partner survived, and she was an EMT, and she did some CNA work, some tech work, and sort of was on the same exact path as I was before I became a nurse. And so that's why I carry her with me through most of my events, and why I wanted her to walk with me for graduation.
And how the world works, I was in Martha's Vineyard last week at an event with Breonna Taylor's mother and Tamika Mallory, who is a brilliant advocate and activist who leads an organization, Until Freedom. I name Until Freedom because they are very much still engaged in supporting Breonna Taylor's family, but also to ensure that Daniel Cameron, who chose not to prosecute those who killed Breonna in her home, is now running for governor of the state of Kentucky. So still a lot of work to be done. The other thing that I learned last week, which I was ignorant to prior to that, is that if not for the fact that Breonna's sister was out of town, she would have been murdered too. The vast majority of the bullets that were fired into their home landed in the room where she would have been sleeping, if not for the fact that she was out of town that night. So we could have a whole nother conversation about gun violence as it relates to the medical industrial complex. But if anybody's interested in learning more about or engaging in the work around justice for Breonna Taylor, please visit Until Freedom.
Thank y'all so much for being here. I think it's really important for y'all to know that before, first of all, it's important to know that medicine was never made for black people, right? Healthcare wasn't made for black people. It was practiced on black people to be perfected for white people. So the fact that we are patients now, are able to be patients now, are able to receive care is not old, it's new. Just 1960 wasn't that long ago. My mom was born in 1960, and in 1960, experimental lobotomies were being done on black boys because they were hyperactive, right? And they didn't have the attention span that the physicians wanted to see. And so they started digging around in their brains with ice picks to see what happened. That was 1960. It wasn't that long ago. So medicine is far from perfect. Our insurance companies, they negotiate with the medical providers. So when a service is done, let's say we go to the ER and we get a CT scan, there's a price tag on that, but the price tag is this to this. It's a range. And then the insurance company and the medical provider go back and forth. And they say, nah, I don't want to pay that, lower it. And that's something that y'all don't know about, right? So when we go to the doctor, if we don't have insurance and we have to pay out of pocket, just know that it's your right to dispute the bills, and you can ask for a lower price or a revised price. It's also important to know that medicine doesn't exist without you all. It doesn't exist without us as patients. It doesn't. And so it's our privilege to care for y'all. It's not the other way around. Okay, it's a service that we're providing to you all, and it's our privilege to do so. Just remember that the next time you have to go to the doctor, you have to go to the hospital. Okay.
Will you say it so it can be recorded? Here,
Yes.
I'll bring you my mic. No, here you go.
I was just going to say, feeding off of that, we talk about healthcare as a right. Healthcare was never intended to be a right. It's a commodity. And like she said, it was not meant for black people, but also it was not meant for poor people, yes. Right? It was meant for who could afford it and who was privileged enough to be able to access it. So I think that's, and it's still that, like yes. we're fighting for it to be a right, but it was never intended to be a right. And I think that's something really, really important to understand and differentiate.
Most certainly. Thank you.
Let's give Britney another round of applause, as well as to the staff who made this possible, and to all of you again, thank you for the gift of